Hello and welcome everybody to the August 26th Octant community meeting. Today on the agenda we have a few items. Let me get that shared. We're going to be talking about some updates to the kind of the restricted RBAC and revisiting RBAC and the restricted access. We're going to be looking at some of the updates that have recently happened with our need for speed changes. And there's going to be some talks about moving to Angular 10 and Clarity 4. I think we're just announcing that we're doing it. And then we'll get into some JavaScript plugin updates. And then there's a demo on Kind plugin that I believe Sam's been working on. So I'll start with the revisiting RBAC and restricted access. This has been a long-standing issue within Octant. Currently, the current implementation of Octant, what it does is there's a has access cache, and when it attempts to access a resource, it makes an entry in that cache for the kind, the version, and the namespace, and then it keeps track of any time that is received an error trying to access that resource. It will then make attempts to continually try to access that resource with kind of a logarithmic backoff. This works pretty well if you have like the right set of access, basically. Like if you have very, very restricted access where like your scope to say a specific namespace with only the ability to list deployment, replica set, pod, like list, get, watch for those items. Then this starts to become very slow as you're waiting for a lot of things to kind of back off and get those errors from the API server. And it's mostly slow in the initial launch of Octant and usage. Like as the system settles into its back off patterns and it kind of knows what it can get to, then there's less slowness. But the initial experience when you first launch Octant in a RBAC restricted cluster is pretty bad. There's a lot of errors that just get spammed right out into the console, and there's a lot of loading indicators and waiting, and it's kind of this unsure state of, are things going to work correctly? So I'm considering some new ways to approach this, and one of them is to kind of remove the what we do now, which is like this backing off and logging approach, and kind of switching to a try once and forget approach. But by forget, I mean put an entry into a page within Octant so that you can see what was attempted and failed, and then be able to go ahead and say, like, retry these things. Like I have a new, my cluster role has been changed and the bindings are updated, and I just want to refresh this context. So go ahead and try that stuff again. We're trying to be like really smart about it and be like, oh, we'll watch for it and we'll automatically refresh and we'll do all this. And it just turns out that that's a lot of work for very little gain. If we just surface this information, let you know that it's happening, and then give you the ability to kind of just retry. Doing that manually is much better than doing that well manually is much better than doing it poor automatically. So I'm going to be exploring this area and hopefully put up some PRs later this week, and Thursday and Friday, that will attempt to use this new model, and we can solicit some feedback and see what people think about it. Any questions, comments, concerns there? All right. Moving on to the need for speed updates. So this came out of the Octant Developer Summit that we did. As I clicked this, I just thought, man, I should really inspect before I click on an open document, like I should really inspect where that link goes. I just assumed it went to so this is the dynamic components PR that Brian Lyles did. And what this does is there's a whole suite of changes in here that kind of move us towards dynamically loading the content of a component versus trying to do them both at the same time. Previously, especially with data grids, we were getting into this thing where if you had many data grids on a page, they would take a very long time to render, especially if you're putting content into them. But an empty data grid will render onto the page very quickly. So by rendering them all empty and then using like a kind of a set timeout to go and then almost immediately fetch the same data that we would want to load in there, the experience on the user side is a much faster feel of the information being loaded and presented on the page. And that's because all of the containers that are going to have this information in them get presented almost immediately. And then as you cycle between new tabs and different views, the content in those containers is what's being updated. So this is a great improvement. We're still going to be doing work in this area. There's some fixes that need to come down from this. I think loading indicators have some wonkiness to them now. And there was something else that this kind of broke or interrupted. I can't remember.
And one storybook story is broken. So.
That's right. Yeah, there was.
You can fix that.
Yeah, right here, storybook for the dynamic components. So yeah, so that's where that's at. We're going to continue to make speed improvements. We had mentioned in the last community call that we are going to be going down this road and making some performance enhancements and most of it will be, you'll see most of the stuff happening on the front end more so than the back end, because the back end is well, it's already pretty fast. And then, you know, the main limiting factor for the back end is how fast is the API server. Because once we consume that information, we render it out to the stream relatively quickly. I'm sure there are some optimizations we can make there, but most of our gains are going to be seen on the front end. So this will be in the next release, which hopefully will be, I think we'll be doing one relatively soon. There's a lot of good stuff that it's landing in master right now. So likely we'll be doing ODOT 16. ODOT 16 soon. Yeah, Sam's nod says that I picked the right version number, so that's good. Any things I missed there or stuff, anything people want to add? Okay, the next one I'll let someone else talk about. This is the moving to Angular 10 that was put in there.
On that, I can give a quick update. So yes, it's happening. We're moving to Angular 10 and Clarity 4.0. I had some issues with the Monaco editor, but I just resolved it half an hour ago. So I'm just in a final phase of testing, making sure everything still works, and hopefully that PR is coming later today.
Great. Is there anything with moving to 10 and Angular 10 and Clarity 4 that we like? Are there any? Because I haven't really looked at like the release notes and highlights. So what's kind of like what's the high level take of like what do we get?
Right. So for Angular, they describe it as a pretty minor update because they released 9, I think 4 months ago, something like that. So there's not that much stuff there. Clarity 4.0 is upgrading to the new model where they have a core and then Angular and React on top of that. And so that's the big change there. It should not, I think they have some new components too, but it should not affect us at this point much. Along with those changes, we are upgrading the versions of other dependent libraries. I forgot all of them now, but I'll list them in a PR. So it's basically just bringing everything up to the most recent.
And so with the current version of Clarity that we're using, which I think is 3.18 or 3.18, I think. Are we so that doesn't use this new Clarity core model?
Right. Oh, actually it does. Actually,
it does.
We already use, but I think they changed it a little bit, so it's a little more. I think at some point the change we'll have to do is the Clarity UI module will go away.
Go away. Got it. Yeah.
And Clarity icons too. So we should probably look into that right after upgrading just to make sure.
Okay.
I don't want to do too much at once, but we may need to remove those and to eliminate some of the libraries we don't need, hopefully.
Yeah. Great. Thanks for that update.
Sure thing.
So moving on to some JavaScript plugin updates. I just wanted to go over these quickly. So as we mentioned, the JavaScript API for plugins is going to be continuing to get some significant investment. It's still very early for the JavaScript plugin API and general, like the supporting libraries and documentation around it, but we're working to actively improve those. We're building out some plugins of our own using it. So we're kind of dog fooding it so that we can make those improvements and kind of, I think as Scott said earlier, sand down some of the rough edges around building JavaScript plugins. So one of the things that's there now is we're generating some of the TypeScript code out of Octant from our component models. So we have these components that are defined in Go. We've annotated those, and now we're generating some factories and helpers off of those component models. So that's something that we will be placing into a new repo soon, which would be the octant-ts-lib repo. It's going to contain those generated models, as well as a set of helpers for creating components, working with the dashboard client, working with sending alerts and sending events up into Octant, dealing with routing and path handling and navigation and stuff like that. We've slowly been kind of building out this set of helpers and extending them and trying to figure out what all those patterns are going to look like and kind of what we want the shape of this thing to be. So with that said, the Yeoman generator that is out there for generating Octant plugins has been updated. It's going to have these new automatically generated libraries baked into it. It's not the best model because once you generate your plugin with the like you do Yo Octant plugin, well, now you're pinned to this version that came with the generator you used. So that's kind of the motivation behind getting that octant-ts-lib library out there, is that now npm and yarn can use that to install those files. And then even though you've used the Yeoman generator to scaffold your plugin, you can easily update those libraries as we continue to make improvements. You don't have to go and fetch a whole new generator and regenerate a project and then copy things over. You could just npm update or yarn update your octant-ts-lib to get the latest set of changes. So that's the direction that's going in. We've recently merged some PRs that now allow the JavaScript plugins to send events. This was leverage the work that Sam did for enabling send alert in the Go plugin API. We took that same approach for the JavaScript plugins, but being that it was on the JavaScript side, we were able to actually be a little less specific, which was nice. And so on the JavaScript side, it's send event, and sending an event can be any events that the front end currently supports, which right now is only alerts anyway. So there is a PR up from Scott to make the front end support the content path event. So a plugin will be able to send a content path change. Think of that just like you would do a redirect after posting form data or something like that. This will be very useful for a lot of folks. I know there was a Helm plugin that wanted to do something like that. There was a JX plugin that wanted to be able to redirect. We're creating a plugin that we want to be able to do redirects with. So a very common pattern that people want to be able to do. So that'll be there soon, and likely in the next release. Anything I missed around JavaScript plugins? I think so. They're moving quickly. They're getting better. So if you are writing one and you run into issues, please open them. Reach out to us in the Slack channel. And that's it. So now there is a kind plugin demo. I believe this is Sam.
Yep, that'll be me. This one should be fairly quick because it's still fairly in rough shape, but I think it'd be kind of fun to share. So this is a plugin that I've been working on. It's in Go, not JavaScript. Sorry, Wayne. And the reason for that is because when you have, I guess, the kind, I'm importing kind here to create a cluster, and you can have this really nifty v1 alpha4 config. And the idea was that we'd have this form that would populate this object, and then kind has this very nifty just provider create. And we can hook that into a plugin and effectively have information that you would have otherwise be doing with a kind CLI into a UI. So effectively, this form here does nothing so far. What we actually get so far is an overview of all your kind clusters. And this is really the analog of, I can go back to the Docker PS. If you kind of run Docker, you can kind of see that your client clusters are really just these node images of a particular Kubernetes version. So I'm also importing Docker to run these commands in the back, and it's looking for the version of Kubernetes that you're running. And the motivation here is that we'd eventually have this form which will either look up or download the image you need, and it can show you what images are available, and you can control how many workers or nodes that you'd want in this particular cluster. And you can kind of see these configurations in the kind documentation. So this will construct this cluster config file for you behind the scenes. And currently right now this does nothing because we haven't really implemented how to pass data in our stepper component yet. But let's say this is filled out. And the second step here is feature gates, and feature gates are interesting. I think it's also documented in here somewhere. You have a particular feature gate name, and it could be true or false. And then you'd also have, depending on what kind of feature gate it is, you'd also actually have to insert the name of the feature gate in other parts of the config as well. And there's a kind issue open for that. But these would be, you check them off. And I guess the interesting piece of this is what if a particular feature gate is not enabled for a particular Kubernetes version? So some of these might actually have to be grayed out or removed entirely. So this will be a dynamic stepper. But let's say we actually hit submit and we create a cluster. This will start spinning up, and ideally the vision is that we'd have a logger that's going to be provided. Right now it's a cluster, I don't know if you can see this in the screen share, but right now it's cluster provider with Docker. Ideally this would be some sort of logger that can be provided, and this is something you can do. It's like a cluster dot, I think it's what, logger? Provider with logger. Yeah, so you can provide a logger, and maybe there's some way to show what's happening. Because right now what's going to happen is it's still creating this cluster, but you can't really see it. It usually takes around 30 seconds. But when it does get created, what happens is that kind will actually change my current context. So right now we can see it's still on this kind knative cluster that I've already had running. But when the cluster is successfully created, we should see a kind test pop up, and that's how we know that this new cluster is good to go. And once it is, we can kind of see that if I navigate back to maybe the path here, this is just a clean kind cluster that we've just made a few seconds ago. And other than that, it's also got a delete. I haven't tried out the delete yet. I don't think it works. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. It does not, but that's all right. Yeah, so that's pretty much all I have. If y'all have any ideas or feedback with what you might like to see in such a plugin, feel free to share. I haven't really pushed the code up for this, mainly because I'm still blocked on the stepper. But once I unblock this and kind of have the form semi-working, I will push this to GitHub somewhere.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. Yeah, I think the two things you mentioned, which were getting the logging like if we can get that logging surfaced up so we can actually see the steps as they're happening, that would be pretty great. But yeah, that's really cool. I think that that'd be super useful for a lot of people. I'll mention this. I have a kind plugin that you might be interested in, which I will link in the chat here. It's very, very rough, but it's also written in Go. This is specific around the kind registry. It lets you load, you know, when you're dealing with kind, you can load from your local Docker registry, you can load modules into the Kubernetes server or into kind so that it can see it, so that it can access those images. So if you're building custom images locally and you want to then deploy them in kind, you have to load them over. And this plugin will do that. It uses the CLI to perform all of those actions, but this might be something that you might want to tie into the to your kind plugin once you get a little further along. And because again, I just like did it and was like, hey, it worked kind of, and then moved on. So it would be good to have a more like yours seems like it's moving in the direction of being a little more robust, and having like a tab that exposes what I've done as its own plugin, but just like having a tab, like registry tab, or something to that, or another menu item in there, registry. That could be really neat too.
Yeah, I'll definitely take a look and see if we can tie this together. And yeah, I'm pretty stoked on this one.
Yeah, no, super useful. Like I'm excited for it to get to the point where I can use it. I want to use it.
Can you use it if you don't have a context set? Like if you have no Kubernetes clusters running at all, can you get to the plugin to be able to bootstrap a cluster then?
Yeah, currently no, because you just can't even get to that view. I mean, unless you, actually, that might be good. I haven't tried. I guess it's probably no, because you just really can't click it. Or like maybe if you just hit to the path directly, but you can't really get to it from the UI.
Yeah. Yeah. The way we deal with the routing when you don't have a config is we load in a temporary handler, so that handler wouldn't even have the module routes on it, so it wouldn't even know where to send that traffic.
Might be interesting to allow a plugin to hook in the case when there is no config.
Yeah, I think that would be an interesting setup. Like Brian and I were talking the other day about plugin capabilities and being able to, there's a couple things. That's one where being able to say, expose this plugin when there is no config, because it does setup work. Another one is being able to say, this plugin execs. So like we need, like, if you think about you're running a plugin in cluster, plugins in cluster can't just randomly exec. They're not designed like, so being able to have a set of capabilities beyond our, right now we register, a plugin will register like I support this stuff, but similar to how right now we say I am a module, it'd be really nice to have a better way to say I'm a module, I do local execution, I support, I have, you know, no config support or whatever, something like that, but in an intuitive way that's not what I just said. Excellent. Well, I think that is all we have, unless there are any. Let me check, make sure there's no questions that got added. No, looks like we are done. Thank you everyone for attending, and I will see you next week.